Hi, bookworms. Welcome to Best Book Ever, the podcast where we talk about your favorite books. I'm your host, Julie Strauss, and my guest today is H. Claire Taylor. Claire writes funny books from her home in Austin, Texas. She's published a couple dozen of them across various pen names. She's the author of the Jessica Christ series about God's only begotten daughter, the East Wind Witches Cozy Mysteries, and my personal favorite, the Killhaven Police paranormal comedy series. She also does story consulting for indie authors through her company, FFS Media, and she hosts the Sell More Book Show, a weekly podcast with self-publishing tips and news. I'm super excited that Claire is here with me today to tell me why The Princess Bride is the best book ever. For more information on how to support this podcast, check out my Patreon. For about the cost of a latte, you can have access to exclusive interview clips that are only available to my patrons, advance access to the books we discuss, and more. Go to patreon.com, that's patreon.com/bestbookever, to learn more about how you can help me keep the candles burning over here in my reading cave. Now, back to the show. Hi, Claire.
Hey, Julie.
Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to talk about this book and all of the things that come with this book. But let's start by talking about you first, because you are equally fascinating. Tell me about your reading life. What kind of reader are you?
Oh, I'm all over the place. I am about 50-50 fiction, nonfiction reader, actually. And I really like darker, grittier stuff, both fiction and nonfiction. And I like, fantasy. I read a lot of fantasy. Comedy. I like memoir. I like true crime, detective novels, all that stuff is fun for me. Mystery, thriller. But then anything that's good. So actually, The Princess Bride is a kind of a diversion from my usual reading habit.
How did you first come across Princess Bride? Do you remember?
Oh, it was in high school, actually. So I liked the movie. And so I'd originally heard of the movie when I was in middle school. And this boy I really liked was obsessed with it. And I never watched it. So I got my mom to rent it at Blockbuster, and we sat and watched it, and I didn't really get it. I didn't quite get it was good. I was like, oh, that was fun, but I didn't quite get the appeal. And then it just kind of seeped into my life through repeated watching, where, especially in high school, I would watch it every Friday after school. I would come home and watch it by myself because I had such a great social life. And then when I found out that it had come from a book, I was a little late to that party. I immediately went and got the book and started reading it and was like, oh, holy shit, this is so funny. Like, this is funnier than the movie and way, way better. And so that is how I found it. And I started reading it and then, proselytizing, telling everyone they had to read it too. And most of my friends did not appreciate it like I did.
Do you still like the movie?
Oh, yeah. I mean, at this point, I like it for very different reasons. Mm-hmm. It's just like one of those comfort foods.
Yes. I thought it was so funny reading this book because it is so indistinguishable, and in our cultural consciousness, it's so indistinguishable from the movie that I heard every single line in the actors' voices.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's the benefit of having the author write the screenplay, is that he has no problem just being like, okay, that was a really great line that I wrote. I'm going to use that in the movie. And then we're going to have, Cary Elwes or whoever say it, or, we're going to have Inigo say it in his like fake Spanish accent.
Yeah.
And it's ingrained.
Right. I was trying to think, I played this little game before we started talking of other movies that have, where the actor in the movie has sort of supplanted the book. Because, everybody has their opinions on whether the book is better than the movie, and usually the book is better, but every now and then we get these books made into movies where the movie becomes what we all know. And the only ones I could think of that do this, in addition to Princess Bride, I thought of Silence of the Lambs, and Gone with the Wind, and Shrek. Which,
that's interesting.
Shrek is nothing like the book, because I used to read the book to my kids when they were little, and they were like, this is not Shrek, because it's not even close. But it's relatively rare. For all the books that are made into movies, it's rare that the movie then supplants the book in our collective imagination, the way this one does.
Yeah, and it's nice to realize, like, oh, wait, there's a book version of this?
Yes.
Like when you discover the movie first and you go back and read it, and you always hope that it's better, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
This one actually is. And even the book about the movie. Have you seen As You Wish, Cary Elwes's memoir about it?
Such a delight.
It is. And I was terrified to read it because I was like, if this ruins this movie or him for me, like if he turns out to be an egomaniac actor, because I hate actors talking about acting. It's one of my least favorite things in the world. It's like at the end of all the HBO shows, they have, you know, like behind the scenes. And I'm like, no, I'm like shouting at John, like, turn it off. I don't want to hear actors talking about acting. But this, it was just so delightful.
Do you like hearing writers talk about writing?
No.
No?
As someone who talks about writing, like
is that why? Because you talk about it all day, every day?
Yeah. I mean, I don't mind talking about it like with other writers and having like discussions. I don't get necessarily super inspired by listening to other writers talk about writing. I mean, I have been taking the Dan Brown Masterclass, and that's really fun because it's not so much talking about writing as it's talking about like, how do you make a story that people can't stop? You know, like, so it's more, can't stop reading and the page turner. And so it's more about reader psychology, which that interests me. But like when people get, deep in the weeds about like crafting the perfect sentence, or like when people get on their high horse about, adverbs or whatever, I'm like, oh, come on. Nobody.
This is why we have copy editors.
Right. Like your fellow academics care. Readers don't care.
It's funny because part of me, I would love to sit down with William Goldman and say like, tell me, how did you craft this? It would be so fascinating.
Oh, William Goldman, I would have a long conversation with him about it.
About the writing?
Yeah, he's kind of in that category with like Kurt Vonnegut where they just don't care anymore. Like they're like, this is the story I'm going to tell, and you're not going to tell me how to tell it.
There are super weird tricks in here that are very winking tricks. The asides, the one you read in the intro about that's not necessary. There's nothing expository in there. That he obviously had to have some pull to be able to pull those framing techniques off.
Right. And I'm sure his editor was like, what do we do here? Right. Because when you're like, even really great editors get into editor mind where it's like, okay, my job is to enforce the rules. And it can be kind of like, this breaks a rule. What do I do? Did you mean to do it like this? Like those kind of comments. But there's another one. Do you mind if I read another little?
Please do.
Okay. This is actually in the, like, at the end, they have the section. He has the section of Buttercup's baby. He says, okay, so the kidnapping's already happened. Then in the unexplained Inigo fragment, he tells us that the kidnapping's about to happen, at least according to King's cousin he does. Now here, he goes back to before Buttercup and Wesley have even safely gotten away from Humperdinck. I think it's interesting, but some of you may find it confusing. Willie, my grandchild, did. I was reading it out loud to him, and how great a feeling was that, sports fans, when he said, wait a second. So I did. And he said, how can Inigo hear about the kidnapping? And then in the next sentence, practically, it's Buttercup's bride, the Prince's Bride all over again. I explained that it was the way Morgenstern chose to tell this particular story. Then he said this, can you do that? I sure hope so.
That's got to be my favorite trick is the I'm only putting in the best parts trick of it.
Well, right. And
that is so cute.
And that bit about like, can he do that? That was my whole reaction when I first read this. I'd never read anything like it. In high school, it's like, you got to read the classics. And then I would read like my teen fiction and my like teen fantasy and stuff. I was a big reader in high school, but I'd never read anything that just was like, we're going to make up the rules. Yeah. And it was so refreshing. This was actually the book where I was like, I have to write humor. And so I started writing my first novel after reading this.
Which was what? Have you published that one?
Yeah, it's The Fraud. Don't ever read it.
Oh.
It's written by a high schooler.
A high schooler who published a novel? That doesn't happen too often.
I published it after college. I revised it a couple of times in college and then published it. And it's still not good. But I had to get my first one out sometime. So
it is funny that this book in particular and humor in general is not taught more often, isn't it? Because there's something about lightness that makes people think that it's not academic or it's not worthy of study. And this is the perfect example of something that is, because of all those framing things, because of all the, let's just try it and see. He obviously knows all of the rules of editing and plotting, and he has decided, I'm going to do it my way. And also, what a perfect way to teach kids rules by someone who's screwing around with them.
Oh, yeah. I think you might have hit on why it's not taught. It's because it flouts the rules. Humor is always subverting something, some expectation. And when you have like satire or parody of the actual genre, you have to know it really well, and then you make fun of it. And I think the people who are trying to teach, not necessarily like, younger kids, but even in like college level, they're kind of stuck in the rules because that's what they have to teach. And their whole job is to enforce that and be like, no, that's not the rule. You have to learn the rule before you can break it. But I mean, my like writing education in college, it was like creative writing and English literature. It was like pounding all of the creativity out of you.
Yes.
It was like forcibly like, well, if it's not literary fiction, it doesn't count. And it's like, okay, well, that's wrong. First of all, maybe the fact that you're confining yourself to a genre that's really hard to sell is why you're a professor and not the author you wanted to be. But so, I mean, I'm a little snippy about it, but yeah, I think people don't like humor because it's a dangerous thing. It's like even the lighthearted humor is a weapon.
Do you call this one lighthearted?
No, I don't think it's lighthearted. I think it's maybe flippant. It's because it is all about like the world's not fair, but it flips that on its head so many times. You're like, well, what is he even trying to say? Right? It's like, oh, the world's not fair. And then, at the end, it talks about everything kind of goes to shit. All these things that have been building up goes to shit and they don't get their happy ending. And then you get Buttercup's baby and you're like, wait, she's alive? Like, what happened here? And so it's like, she's alive, she's dead. Like, it's all these, and then this baby and then Fezzik. It's just like, there's a lot of death and then not death in this book. So there's a lot of like tricking you, right? Oh, Wesley's dead. Oh no, it's unfair. Oh, he's come back to life. Right. So it never quite follows through with the meanness and like the, oh, it's bad. Things are unfair. So the whole thing is saying it's unfair. And then it just keeps, turning that on its head and being like, yes, but he's only mostly dead.
So after you discovered this, you decide you're going to write your own damn book, however you want, because of this book. I love having a specific starting point like that. Did you continue on being a satire and comedy reader from there, or you just kept on with everything?
Yeah, but I think one of the motivations was that I read this book and that I couldn't find any books this funny. And so I was like, well, I guess I got to write them. And so, I always was kind of on the hunt for stuff like this. And, I think in maybe high school, maybe college, I don't remember exactly when I, found Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And I was like, okay, this is another funny one. Add it to the list. So it's really hard to find the genuinely hilarious stuff. And so it's kind of been like a lifelong pursuit of trying to find them and then adding them to my collection.
Tell me, what do you think of Buttercup? And I'll tell you why I'm asking, because my kids hate Buttercup in the movie. And I think she is delightful because I love Robin Wright. Love her. And I just think there's something about her face that makes her look like a badass, even when she's screaming and getting kidnapped, you know? But my kids, my girls especially, they can't stand Buttercup in the movie because all she does is scream and she's so passive, and I don't think she is. But in the book, they talk a lot about how dumb Buttercup is.
Yes. Well, I think the problem in the movie, and it's like they couldn't have found someone to do more of the heavy lifting than Robin Wright. You know, like she did all the heavy lifting, but the character in the movie just doesn't have any agency, really.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So I think that's probably why your strong-willed daughters can't stand her, you know? They're like, she's not making any decisions. Was she just going along with this? This is ridiculous. And then in the book, she's just kind of like a spoiled brat. And it's great. I mean, she's like, she's not painted in a great light in the book. And it's funny. I mean, I could probably read into it and be like, oh, yeah, the only female character is like painted like a bimbo. But everyone is made fun of in this book.
Yeah. And I think that's another one where the movie sort of supplants the, if I'd have read it first without having seen the movie, I might not have liked it all that much. But, you know, we just have such a cultural affection for this movie, which is so fantastic.
Yeah. And I think the book really does a whole new layer of work that the movie couldn't possibly do because of the form. And like in the movie, my least favorite part is the grandfather-grandson moments. I don't like them. They've always annoyed me. I've always just wanted to skip to the next scene. But in the book, the asides and like the interruptions and him describing his like, you know, barely articulate Italian father reading this to him and like not translating super well, or you know, it's hilarious and it's one of my favorite parts.
Yeah.
And all the you know, backstory about getting the book and then dealing with the Morgenstern estate and then his wife who he clearly hates and his son who is like a complete disappointment. It's hilarious, and I can see why they would be like, this isn't going to translate. We should just like, you know, tighten it up and do some other similar thing. But it just doesn't translate. It goes from being one of my favorite things to one of my worst things.
Is it hard to write funny? Because your books are so damn funny. And it seems so hard to me.
It's hard for me not to be funny in my books. Like I've tried it. And so I have been writing a lot, like, you know, since I was, I don't know, 8, I started writing screenplays and stuff, you know, and I think in 5th grade, I had like 2 notebooks handwritten of some fantasy story I had, but I never completed something until it was funny. It just didn't hold my interest. And I think part of that was, you know, you get to writing, you're like, oh man, okay, this is getting kind of boring, this scene, you know, because I was a pantser at first and, you know, bless my heart. So I'd get kind of like, ugh, this is boring. And then I'm like, well, how can I completely flip this on its head? And that's comedy. So it's just changing directions a lot, not falling into tropes, just being kind of irreverent, which I do by accident a lot of the time. So, you know, I mean, there are times when I'm like, oh God, this scene is not funny. Like, what the hell am I going to do? And I can't figure out how to make that scene funny right off the bat. And at those times it's hard because I'm like, I think this needs to be funny and it's just not there. But I just think all of life is kind of ridiculous. So it's pretty easy to find inspiration for me.
Particularly now.
Right. And I know that doesn't sound like there's no humility in what I just said, but it's how, you know, it's just the genre for me.
Do you reverse engineer it? Do you look at it and think, you know, what if this situation happened? That would make a fascinating book and I'm going to make it funny. Or do you start off with, this situation is hilarious?
Yeah, I usually start with a funny premise.
You start with the funny and then you build the story from there?
Right. So with the Jessica Christ series, I thought of it while I was administering the STAR test, which is like the standardized test in Texas, to a bunch of 8th graders, which is the worst. It's the worst because it's 4 hours long, no matter how quick they finish. You have to keep them completely silent. You can't check your email. You can't grade papers. You can't do it. You have to look at them, actively observe them for 4 hours. And so we'd always come up with these ideas. The teachers would make these games like, okay, in your head, you're going to like assign each student an animal that you think they'd be. So you find ways to entertain yourself of like, oh, that kid is, that one's definitely a warthog, or that one is like, a squirrel or whatever, based on their personality and everything. And so it was during one of those long stretches that I was like thinking, I don't even remember exactly what got me thinking about it, but like, man, if God had a daughter, she would have a hard time getting anyone to believe her. And it would just be this uphill battle. And so then I was like, that's kind of funny. And then I was thinking of like just basic scenarios that would mirror kind of, New Testament stuff or whatever, or even just a lot of that humor is drawn on like the made up stuff that people just assume is in the Bible, but is like not, so just people have done it to serve their own needs. And then it's like, well, how would that look if a woman did it? And it would be a completely different outcome. So I started thinking of that sort of thing. And like, okay, that was just kind of like the concept that came up. And then more and more stuff kept coming up. And so that was how I started the general series. And then for each book, I sit down and before I start writing, I write a cool shit list. So it just says cool shit at the top. And then I write anything funny that's come to me about like the upcoming, scenarios that I'm going to have, So if it's like my Killhaven Police series, which is paranormal police comedy, then it's any funny stories that my husband, John, who is a cop, has told me that were just super outrageous. I'd write those down, like a drunk driver wrecking out, and then another drunk driver hitting the cop car who's dealing with the first drunk driver, and then another drunk driver hitting the ambulance who's dealing with the, 2 drunk drivers. And that like has actually happened. So I'll write that down. And and so that's kind of where I start. And then I just piece it together. And then once you get to know the characters and their little quirky personalities, it's easy to just be like, oh, yeah, there's that funny one. I'm going to throw him in here and see what happens kind of thing.
And then what if you just think of something randomly funny through the day that like, you're making tacos or something and you think of a funny joke about, I don't know, fish tacos. But it doesn't fit in Killhaven or Jessica Christ. Do you have like a book of a million jokes that you page through to?
I will write it down if it's something that I can, since I've been kind of like amassing my like stand-up comedy stuff. If it's funny enough, I'll kind of jot it down and try and structure some sort of joke around it. So I don't like things to go to waste.
Yeah, especially not brilliance.
I don't know about brilliance. Can dick jokes ever be brilliant?
I think it depends on who's telling them.
I make a lot of dick jokes, a lot of poop jokes.
So it's got to be scarier to be telling jokes on a stage than it is in a book?
No.
No?
No, because there's sort of this unspoken policy if you don't record other people, especially when it's like open mic, you don't record it. So you say it, and if it goes over poorly, if it just lands like a lead weight, you're like, all right, scratch that from the list. If you do it in a book, it's in print forever. And you're like, oh man, like there are a lot of jokes I've told that I'm like, I don't know if I've worded that exactly right. And I'd probably open myself up to someone misinterpreting it. And there was one time where I accidentally wrote a joke in which one of my beta readers came back and was like, I don't think it's cool to make fun of people with AIDS. And I was like, I don't either. What are you talking about? And she showed me that I hadn't quite phrased this specific joke right. And it looked like I was making fun of people with AIDS rather than people who were misinformed about how people got AIDS. And I was like, oh, okay. Thank you. So it's stuff like that where sometimes, you still need to tweak the phrasing a little bit. So yeah, I'm more nervous about putting things in writing than just saying them to a crowd of people who are all there and kind of understanding. And also if you've ever been to a comedy open mic night, there's nothing I could say that would be the worst thing that's said there. I think we've talked about this, but the women show up exponentially more prepared than any of the men. And so, I mean, yeah, there's some, and it's not just like they're unfunny jokes. They're like blatantly racist and sexist and, you know, just disgusting. And you're like, that was one for your therapist, not for the stage. What I love is the people who get up there. I've only seen men do this. So I'm not going to say it's only men, but I've only seen men do this, that I get up there with their like 4 or 5 minutes and go, well, I don't really know what I'm going to say. So, it's like, well, then by all means, take up our time. Yeah, get on a stage and just do that. Just look the way you look. And we'll, you know, it's like, okay, well, next, like we need one of those, you know, shepherd's hooks.
Yeah, yes, right. Sorry, that was a requirement. Yeah, well, thanks, Claire. You're going to be responsible for this podcast getting its first #NotAllMen protest.
Oh, well, you know, we knew it was coming. We knew it was coming.
Just a matter of time.
I will say it was not all men.
Not all
I mean, it was not all men not every man did it, but it was all men who were doing it.
Got it. But in general, when you're reading humor or satire, do you tend to go for something with a little sting to it, or do you tend to just want to laugh?
Both. I really don't discriminate against whatever makes me laugh. I'm actually I'm really easy to make laugh. Like I don't pride myself on being like hard to please. Like, nice try. You know, try again next time. That was not a good joke. I will not, you know, degrade myself to laugh at that. I'll laugh at anything. I mean, really. I just like laughing, you know, unless it's like really just bad or boring or cliche. So I like the lighthearted stuff. I love the bitter, you know, biting stuff. Kurt Vonnegut is just brutal. Oh, he's brutal. And I mean, to the point where when I'm reading him, I'm going, damn, Vonnegut, like out loud. My husband's like, what is it? I'm like, come here. I got to read you this passage. It's just, yeah. So I mean, but at the same time, Hitchhiker's Guide is also very goofy and I love that. And, you know, it's just the folly of man. I'm into it. The folly of man and woman.
Yeah, of course. Not #NotAllMen.
Yeah.
And you reread Vonnegut a lot, right? Because I feel like over the years, you've told me that you're reading a Vonnegut at the current moment. So it does seem to me that you read a lot. I don't know if you can see, but well, behind me on my bookshelf, I have all my Vonnegut. I keep it close so I can absorb the energy of it. Yeah, I mean, I really like Sirens of Titan. That's one of my favorites I keep going back to. And it's just silly and it's got like enough silly space travel to make me happy. I will read Vonnegut over and over again. I mean, a lot of his later novels are all kind of the same thing anyway. It's just like this first person narrator that's very clearly him. And I mean, even in Timequake, he's like, yeah, this, you know, the character's name is Kurt Vonnegut. That's the narrator, you know? So it's kind of like a William Goldman type thing, but it's very self-effacing and just no pretense of being good, you know, just like, yeah, I'm miserable and I did these horrible things. And, you know, it's freeing. So I mean, yeah, I'll read anything that makes me laugh. I mean, rom-coms that make me laugh. The only thing is a lot of the times it's hard to find for me rom-coms that actually make me laugh because a lot of the times there's not enough agency. And so I don't find tripping and being clumsy very funny. And I don't mean to say that that's like what all rom-coms do. Obviously not. But that's what a lot of them do. Enough where I'm like, I only read rom-coms if someone's recommended them to me specifically. Particularly if I'm thinking about romantic comedy movies, the more beautiful the actress is, the more clumsy she's going to be. The character will be.
Right. It's like, what's a character flaw that's very non-threatening to men? Oh, she needs to be caught in your arms a lot? Perfect.
She can't cook? That's adorable.
Oh, how cute for her. Well, luckily you're all rich enough to hire someone, so it'll be happily ever after. I mean, I love flawed female characters. And it's hard to, that's a trap though, right? Because we don't allow women to have the same level of flaw as we allow men to have before they are considered unlikable. So it's hard to find flawed female characters because a lot of the times the audience doesn't think they're likable, or the editors didn't think they were likable. And so they've had to be rewritten. And it's like, just give me a flawed woman. Who cares? So,
because men are never, male characters are never burdened with that.
No, they can be
make so many
awful.
Mistakes.
They can be abusive, like actually like physically and mentally abusive, and still be the hero. And so it's, I'm going to get you another hashtag on this, but it's just the way it is. I mean, it's the standards we have for even our characters, not just real life, but our characters, makes it really hard to write genuinely funny women, which is why I like writing genuinely funny women, like women who are super flawed. Like in Jessica Christ, her mom, Destiny, is a complete hick, and she's super flawed. And she's been around the high school when she gets pregnant. So she's not sure who the daddy is. So she's just really relieved when the messenger of God tells her that it's God. She's like, at least I know now, and it's like, we all know people who, were kind of, we all know women who got around in high school or whatever, and they've turned out to be just fine. There's nothing wrong with them. It's like, it's just, that's part of it. A lot of people do not like that about the book. And, so that offends people. And in Killhaven Police, the field training officer is this badass werewolf bitch. And she has a lot of masculine traits. And I think that's why people tolerate it, because she's doing it in a setting where it's acceptable, and she's scary, and she's clearly competent. Like, I had to go over the top to make her competent. Like, she's a war veteran, and she's, everyone knows that she would kill someone if given the chance. Like, she has no, so I had to go over the top for her. But as the series goes on, she's clearly more and more imperfect. And that's what I like about her. So some people really can't take it, but I frankly don't give a fuck. So that helps.
That's a nice personality trait for a writer to have. Not giving a fuck.
I mean, yeah, it helps for sure. Especially with what I write.
That's exactly what I was just going to say. It's not like you're shying away from the controversial topics with your Daughter of God series. I would think people who create humor in general have to have an extra bit of remove. More so, I mean, all creators have to have that bit of remove because they're all putting something out into the world to be, in a sense, judged. But for sure, humor writers and maybe memoir writers are the ones that have to have that extra armor to be able to go, the results are not my concern. The creation was my concern, and you just have to be able to withstand, I think, the idea that people are not going to laugh.
Right. Yeah. And I think the important distinction is that it doesn't not hurt when you get a 1-star review, or when someone criticizes you, or when you get up on stage and a joke that you really like just crickets. It doesn't not hurt, but it's a matter of what happens after, immediately following that, like, ooh, that kind of like cringy pain, or like deep soul pain of rejection, where it's just like, okay, do I have the mechanisms in place? Have I developed the mechanisms to work through this and to get perspective quickly? And each time you get perspective a little quicker than the last, and each time you can recover and go, who the fuck cares? Like a little bit faster and actually feel it. And, you can realize you're resilient and you'll live to tell another joke. and you'll write a better joke. And so it's just about the rebound, I think. I don't know that it'll ever really 100% stop hurting it immediately. But even in like a few, it can take like a second for me to recover now, right? Like I've had enough practice where I'm like, okay, all right, back in it, but that sting does kind of hurt. And I imagine it's kind of like being at the bat or at the, at the plate in baseball. Mm-hmm. They strike out all the time. I mean, they're really bad at like their one job percentage wise. They're like, oh, this person gets on base a third of the time. I'm like, third of the time? Who gets to be like 66% shit at their job and keep it and make millions?
It would be terrible if your neurosurgeon had that kind of ranking.
No thanks. I'll take the tumor. Yeah, so but I got to imagine that every time they swing and miss, it's like, oh, shit, I did it again. Sorry, Dad. Like that's kind of the feeling every time. But you just figure out how to recover quickly.
Mm-hmm. So, Claire, what are you reading right now?
Ooh.
Oh.
Let's see. So right now, I have the audiobook A Darker Shade of Magic I'm about to start. And then I am reading Down Girl, The Logic of Misogyny.
Whoa.
It is super intense and it's super like eye-opening, and I would recommend it to everyone.
Really?
It's kind of, I mean, it's written in sort of academic language at first, and so I was like even a little bit, like running into a brick wall because I've just been reading, a bunch of fiction and stuff that's written at like a 5th grade level, and I'm like, which is most fiction, right? So I'm like, whoa, what are these words? It's like moral philosophy jargon. But then once I got through, it was good. And it just, oh my God, it's like, yeah, it's mind blowing. I'm about 70% of the way through, and I have to take it in chunks because I have to like get up and pace. And then I'm reading, let's see what else. What's it called? The Big Picture, I believe it's called, by Sean Carroll. He's an astrophysicist. So it's like about, the origin of the universe and how like life, according to, science is kind of developed through RNA and DNA. And then it's kind of going into this larger organisms and humans. And it's trying, I think, to explore the concept of how consciousness was created out of not consciousness. It's very dense, so I'm chipping away at that too. But both books are very interesting.
Jeez, you really keep some heavy ones on that. If I were reading something like that, I would need something so light and frothy next to it. I wouldn't.
Well,
have
I do. I go
ones.
through it quickly, and I go through the fun stuff. Like I recently read, what was the one I just finished? Oh, Stillness is the Key, or Stillness is the Way. I can't remember. Ryan Holiday. That was easy one. And then The Princess Bride I reread again, and that was a really nice diversion.
I recently told you that I was listening to the audio version of the Neil deGrasse Tyson book, which is his book basically for dummies. And you told me you loved it so much, and I could barely get through one chapter because I just thought, oh, this is too hard for me. I think you're just a brainy type.
Well, yeah, maybe. And I mean, it's challenging concepts, but I've also always been an astronomy nerd. Mm. I don't know that I'd say I'm brainy. A lot of the stuff, a lot of the brainy stuff bores me, but astronomy has always been interesting to me. And so like for some reason in high school, I hated physics, and they kept trying to put me in physics class, and I kept dropping it and was like, no, I'll take chemistry or whatever, anything but physics. It just made me want to scream. And then I started taking astronomy, which has a lot of physics in it. And I was like, oh, this is fine for whatever reason. And one of my professors in college, he was super cool. He was married to an English teacher or an English professor. So already that he's, not just like super one-track mind, but he would look at famous paintings of like, he had some Van Goghs and some Monets, and he would look at the stars and figure out exactly where it was painted from and what day based on the star alignment. So that was like this thing, like every summer he would take students on this trip where they would look at it and they'd calculate the difference between, well, this is probably this star because of the brightness, and this one is probably this star, and there's the moon. So then they would do all these calculations, like wait for the right day of the year, and then like travel to the place, find the exact location, and then take a picture. And so, like, that was his hobby. So I was like, this guy is cool. So he kept me interested in astronomy.
God, that is fantastic.
Right? That's actually enjoying learning for learning's sake, just like that curiosity.
Yeah. And what a way to give you a sense of that the world is constantly going around with or without what we're creating down here. The stars are just doing their thing.
Same star, same everything.
Yeah, that is amazing. I love that. How lucky you were to have that professor.
Yeah, he was very cool. I think that helped me a lot with like wanting to learn more about astrophysics and cosmology and all that kind of stuff, because it just kept my curiosity going at like an early stage.
Would you say that this is why you are the way that you are? Because that professor...
I don't know. Ask my therapist, Julie.
Yeah. No, I just mean in the way that you are always so curious and so thirsty for knowledge, because that professor showed you, I'm going to take this topic, which can be made into a very dry science topic, and I'm going to show you why it's relevant to things like art, that's an incredible gift to be able to show you your fascination is actually applicable to all sorts of different areas. And so it doesn't surprise me that you then became an adult who is fascinated by everything.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that kind of started earlier in my life. When I was younger, I was homeschooled, and we did kind of the unschooling thing. Mm-hmm. And so it was like, I don't know if it was necessarily by choice. I was just a stubborn ass kid. And my mom could not get me to do work if I didn't want to. So she kind of had to trick me into it, like, oh, let's go explore leaves today or whatever, and like I would never write. I hated handwriting. I had really bad motor skills when I was younger. So she got me into calligraphy, and I was like, oh, that's pretty. So then I started doing calligraphy, and that's why my handwriting kind of looks like a serial killer's today. Like, it looks a little unhinged because there's like this weird, like calligraphy element to it. Little extra flourish, like I'm enjoying this too much, and but also like some chicken scratch in there. So I had someone look at my handwriting and analyze it, and I was like, so what do you think? She's like, highly creative, like in the way that I know how to cut up a body in interesting ways.
Not like, I bet you paint pretty pictures.
Right. So that's always, it's like, if I can't do it the way people are telling me, I'm just going to figure out how to do it myself. And so that was kind of it going in. And, I remember when I actually started going to school, it was like 5th grade, and I was already ahead of everyone because I learned like the basics, and the math stuff was easy. Like, there's rules. You just figure out the rules, and then you're like, I apply the rules here. Like, I couldn't figure out why people were having such a hard time with it. Mm-hmm. But it was just because I had been able to follow that curiosity, I think. And I mean, it was like we did maybe a couple hours of school a day. And then it was like, okay, my mom was just like, go outside and play. Like, I need you out. Okay. And then we do soccer, and we do theater and all these different, group homeschool stuff. And so it just never really felt like learning. And then it was just, I think I'm also just naturally a questioner. So that's gotten me into trouble, but I think it helps with humor.
Yeah, I think you're in the absolutely perfect job for you.
Thank you. I hope so, because I've really narrowed all of my options.
Yeah, that's right.
That I've published.
Might be a little hire me. Tough to pivot into maybe academic or religious writing.
I don't think I can go back to teaching at this point. I don't think they'll let me.
Well, the right homeschool co-op will let you.
Right. I think you meant homeschool commune.
Maybe. You're always welcome to teach my kids.
Okay. All right. I'll fly out there. First chance.
Well, Claire, this has been so fun. I want to thank you for getting me to reread Princess Bride, which was such a joy to reread. And it's always so fun to talk to you.
Thank you again for having me. This was fun. I know we didn't talk about the book a whole lot, but
that's okay. We have a lot of other stuff to talk about.
Sit and drink a beer. And I didn't pass out. I gave blood today and they said, don't drink. And I said, okay. Okay, doctor, if that's your real name. And I'm sitting on a workout ball. So this is pretty incredible feat that I have not fallen off.
Good Lord. Will you tell our listeners how to find you?
Like a home address?
Yeah, sure. I think that's a good idea. I think that'd be really smart.
Yeah, I'll just drop a pin on a Google map. Okay, yes, you can find me at www, that's the World Wide Web, .hclairetaylor.com or at www, same web, .ffs.media. That's where I publish all my stuff.
What does that FFS stand for?
For fuck's sake, Julie. That's what it stands for.
Do you get asked a lot?
I do, especially when I wear my FFS shirt.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some people really want it to be something else, right? They're like trying to give me an opening to be like, this does not have the word fuck in it. But I'm like, it does. Sorry.
It does. Yeah. At least with you, we always know exactly what we're getting.
You're so diplomatic.
Thanks for listening, book nerds. For more information on this episode and links to all the books we discussed, please go to our website, bestbookeverpodcast.com, or follow the podcast on Instagram at bestbookever. I'm your host, Julie Strauss, and you can find me everywhere as Julie Wrote a Book. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it on social media and leave a review on whatever podcatcher you use. Reviews really help our visibility to new listeners, and we are grateful for every one. Thanks for joining me today, and I will see you at the library.